We're in his presence at all times. If we have communication with him, we're in his presence. When we talk about prayer like this and being in the presence of God, I think as well we need to be realistic, right? Structured prayer, agbiya, Bible, liturgies, tasbihah, all these things are great. But it's hard to do, during the day, every second, every minute. Yeah, it's what we call structured prayer and non-structured prayer. So structured prayer is very important, and we should always do it, and as much as we can. But it requires time. It requires planning. It requires an agbiya or a Bible. It requires coming to church. It requires going to a quiet space or going to your room. So this kind of prayer requires that things for that to happen. The unstructured prayer doesn't. And this is the kind of prayer we're talking about by staying in the presence of God as much as we can during the day. So, for example, Arab prayers. You guys know Arab prayers? You guys heard Arab? Who doesn't know what an Arab prayer is? Everyone knows what an Arab prayer is. Okay. So something like Arab prayers, very simple, doesn't take any effort, doesn't take any resources, doesn't take any time, doesn't take anything at all. It's Arab prayer. It's 3 seconds or 4 seconds or 6 seconds. So if we really, really challenge ourselves and be real with ourselves, we can afford 6 seconds, 10 seconds, as many times throughout the day as we like. We really can. Practically speaking, we can. And we can be in the presence of God with whatever it is we're doing. While we're driving, while we're hanging out with mates, while we're at work, while we're cooking, while we're eating, while we're serving, while we're not. So while we're anything that we're doing in our mind and in our thoughts, it's not that far-fetched to stay in the presence of God or continually be in the presence of God. It's actually very easy. But at the same time, we're humans and it's very hard for us to do. But if we simplify it like that, it's a lot easier and it's much more within our reach to do. If we think of just 5-10 second short prayers, communications, check-ins with God throughout our day, we will stay in his presence a lot longer. And if we're in his presence a lot longer, we'll be much more control of our thoughts and our minds, and we'll be much more protected from the world and what it throws at us. The other way we remain in the presence of God, if we're repenting, and if we're praying, and if we're doing everything we just said, then, and this is the third part of that verse that St. Paul wrote in Romans, then we'll be doing his will, and we'll be living in accordance with his will. We'll be connected to him, we'll understand him, we'll hear him, we'll comprehend with him. It's a dialogue. We pray and we hear and we feel God talking back to us, and we'll understand in time, we'll understand what God's will is for us. If we have a relationship with him, and if we're talking to him, and if we're always around him and he's always around us, and we're hanging out with him and we're connecting with him, we will know his will for us, and we'll understand and we'll comprehend his will for us. And that's what that verse is saying. It's saying if you don't sign up to what the world offers you, and if you renew your mind by the ways we just said, if you do all that, then you'll understand God's will in your life, and if you live according to it, then you're sweet, you're golden. And then I thought there's a ton of verses in the Bible that talk about this, and there was heaps of them. I just picked a few. But there's so much that talk in the Bible that talks about renewing the mind and things of the mind, and biblical scripture about the mind. The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Colossians, set your mind on things above, not on things of the earth. Therefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you, the revelation of Jesus Christ. And in Psalms, I'll meditate on your precepts and contemplate your ways. So there's another 50 or 100 more verses in the Bible that talk about this kind of thing. Okay? So like we said in the beginning, the mind is very, very powerful and drives everything we do. If we keep our mind with Christ, and if we do what St. Paul tells us to do for the reasons that he tells us to do it, it dictates everything else we do with our being. Everything else we do with our being. And if we don't, and the mind is not in a good place, and we're not in control, and it is negative, and it is problematic, and it is sinful, then that will impact everything we do. Any comments or questions on that verse? Any thoughts? No? Not a very talkative bunch. All right. Clinical. Let's get clinical. So spiritually, and that verse, and sort of breaking it down and better understanding that verse. But I thought, I'm a psychotherapist by trade, so I'll always throw in clinical stuff just because. So from a clinical perspective and from our mind and our brain and how it all works, your thoughts affect your perception and therefore your interpretation of reality. So everything we perceive to be real, everything that we perceive to be reality, who we are, what we're doing, what we're seeing, what we're smelling, what we're eating, the conversations we're having, all of that stuff connected to our emotions and our behavior, it all starts with our thoughts. And again, if there's problems with our thoughts, or if they're problematic, or if we're not in control of them, that could be a disaster for us. And if we are, and it's good, and it's positive, and we're in control, then the outcome, for argument's sake, the outcome will be good. So I thought I'd throw in a few stats. 1 in 5 Australian citizens will experience mental or behavioural conditions each year. And a lot of that, the most common, is anxiety and depression for us. And that's 1 in 5. So if you look at, for each 5 of us sitting here, one of us will have or have experienced some sort of mental or behavioural issue or concern each year, every year. 5 of you guys sitting around, one of us will experience something like that. So it's very, very common, very prevalent. Unfortunately for women, more women experience high psychological distress levels than men by 19% for females. 85%, this one's interesting, 85% of worries and thoughts never actually eventuate. So the research tells us that a lot of what we worry about, our thoughts, what we're concerned about, what we're anxious about, it's about things that doesn't actually happen. 15% yes, or 15% may be stuff that has already happened in the past and is impacting us or worrying us that it could happen again. But 85% of things we worry about doesn't actually eventuate at all. It's all airy-fairy, which is a very, very high percentage. Okay, so CBT. Do you guys know CBT, cognitive behavior therapy? Anyone not heard of CBT? Everyone's heard of CBT. Okay, so I thought I'll explain in very simple terms, not, yes? So these stats were from 2021. Yeah. Look, I don't know. I haven't sort of researched years and I don't have sort of that information. But from my sort of in this industry and my take would be like it has been always high, I believe, or at least in our sort of times. I just don't think it's as reported and as discussed and as prevalent. And with social media and with technology, we wouldn't have known about it. But yeah, I guess for our eras, I think anxiety and depression and mental health has always been an issue. Maybe not 1 in 5, but I think it's always been an issue.
And is 1 in 5 only diagnosed by a professional?
Yeah, statistically, yeah, it would be, yeah. Someone's gone to a clinician or had some sort of psychological assessment or undergone some sort of therapy. So, and yeah, and for the ones that haven't, could be a lot higher. We don't know. So the statistics will obviously be based on actual data. So that's what we know, and could very well be higher if people are not sort of disclosing or seeking help. Yep.
Sorry, with the 85% of worry, don't you have to worry 100% for the 15% that doesn't happen?
Say that again. My mathematics is horrible. Is this a mathematical question?
85% of worrying doesn't happen, or the things you worry about doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But you worry 100%.
Yeah. So.
All the 15% that happen.
Yep.
Is that not?
Yeah, so that stat would be of all your worries, so of all of some, research and studies, of all your 100% of worries in someone's mind or head, 85% of that 100% won't actually happen, and 15% either will happen or has happened, and the worry is because of something that has already occurred to them.
So do we worry or don't worry?
No, you shouldn't worry.
But then what about 15%?
But it's 15%. It's like, it's a little, it's insignificant. There you go. All it's saying is, for what people, in therapy and statistically from this stat, what people share they're worried about, when they explore it further, it's stuff that hasn't happened and will not go on to happen, or a big part of what they worry about actually won't go on to happen. It's in their mind. It's in their psyche. That's what the stat's saying. Yeah. So CBT. So all it is, cognitive behavior therapy, it's your cognition, your mind, your psyche, how that impacts your emotions and your behavior. And from this triangle, it's interchangeable, but for today's talk, we'll start with the mind, but it's interchangeable. So what they're saying is how your mind operates impacts your emotions, how you feel, and it impacts your behavior, how you act and the decisions you make. And they're interchangeable. You can start with behavior, and if you make a dumb decision or you behave in a bad way, that can impact the way you feel, and it can impact the way you think. And equally, if you feel bad, if you start by feeling bad or you have some sort of emotion that's not good, then, or good, whichever way it goes, it will impact the way you think based on that emotion, it'll impact the way you think, and it will impact the way you behave or the decisions you make. So all three are interchangeable. And explaining it a bit further, positive thoughts. So if you start with your mind, if you have positive thoughts, if your psyche is positive, then it will impact your emotions, you'll feel good, or you'll feel better, or you won't feel bad. And if your thoughts are good, you behave well, you make good decisions. And the opposite. If you have negative thoughts, if you're pessimistic, if you're always worried and anxious and depressed and your mind is not operating well, then it will impact the way you feel. So you probably won't be feeling good if your thoughts aren't good, and it will probably impact the way you behave, the actions that you take, or the decisions that you make. And that's a very layman's explanation of CBT. Any questions? Yes.
Just on that, so if we were in the negative and want to get to positive, out of the three, is the easiest one to do something without behaviors, without thinking?
So, if you ask me, I think it starts with your mind. So your behaviors is dictated to essentially by your mind. Your mind will tell you how to behave, or your brain will tell you what decision you make, or where you go, or what you do, or what you say to someone. Yeah? And the same thing with how you feel. Based on what you're thinking about, based on what's consuming your thoughts, that then translates into your emotions and how you feel. So if you ask me, I would probably argue that it all starts with the mind.
How do you make that change? I feel like it's really hard to get.
We're going to get to that. I'm going to give you guys some strategies on how to make that change. But I guess, understanding this stuff is important. Understanding how it's all connected, I think, is important. And this, again, like we said in the beginning, this is how powerful our thoughts are and our mind is. And it's that simple. It's that black and white. If our thoughts are good and our mind is good and we're in control, the rest of us, for the most part, is good. And if it's not, then the rest of us, for the most part, is not good. And this all ties, again, if we go biblically, this all ties into mind, body, and spirit. So we are created as beings. We are created with these three main components: our mind, our body, and our spirit. And it's so important to take care of all three of these things, all as important as each other. If our mind isn't solid, and if we're not in control of our mind, it will impact our body and it will impact our spirit. Even and I don't know if there's any doctors in the room, but if there is, you guys can probably vouch for this. Thoughts and anxiety and depression and mental illness actually impacts your physical body. People have physical ailments, stomach problems, and all sorts of other issues, and the source of it, or what exemplifies it, is issues of the mind. They're connected. And the same thing with our spirit. And from body to spirit, it's all connected. If we're not healthy and we're not fit and we're not taking care of ourselves, it will impact our spiritual life. It'll impact the way we think. If we don't feel good and we're in hospital, or we're sick, or we can't do stuff with our body, it'll impact our psyche and how we feel. Spiritually, if we're not connected to our spirit and connected to God spiritually, and we're not feeding that, it will cloud our mind, and it will impact the way we carry ourselves and the way we conduct ourselves in our behavior, in our body. So all three are connected, and I think all three impact each other. And if we don't pay attention, if we're not physically well, if we're not spiritually well, and if our mind is not well, even if one of those components is not well, it will impact the other two. If two of those areas are not well, it will most definitely impact the third. So three components of our whole being that we really, really should be taking care of. Strategies. So, and a lot of this stuff, it's not hard. It's not hard to do. And we'll go through it. The first one is to breathe. You'll be surprised if you guys are feeling anxious, if you're feeling worried, if your thoughts are not, you're not in control, or if your thoughts are problematic and causing you issues, in that moment, you'll be surprised how effective breathing can be. So to just take a breather, deep breathing exercises can really, really calm you down enough to start getting on top of your thoughts, or to start figuring out the way forward in regards to your thoughts and your psyche. The second one, like we've discussed before, is bringing God, we as Christians, bringing God into the picture. Left to our own devices and our own control, it's probably not going to have as good of an outcome as if we bring Christ into what it is we're doing. We are broken, we are fallen, we are weak, we're on our own, we're nothing. We know this. So rather than trying to figure things out on our own and get on top of our own minds and strategies and techniques and counseling and psychology and all this stuff is fantastic. I do it for a living, so I can vouch for it. It's great. But it's so much better, and it's so much more powerful, and it's so much more successful if we couple it with our faith and with Christ, who can provide us. And even I'm a Christian counselor by trade, and my belief, I refuse to be a secular counselor. I think counseling and psychology, as good as it is, it has a limit. There's only so many strategies, and there's only so many techniques and so many things that science and medicine can muster and can provide, and it's effective and it can do really good work up to a certain extent. And I think our faith carries on from that infinitely. God can come in no matter how depressed someone is, no matter how many medication they're on, no matter how much therapy they've had, psychiatrists, psychologists, whatever it is we throw at them from this world, it can work and it can do good stuff, but it cannot, or it can carry someone up to a certain limit. And from then on, there's more that can be done. So bringing God into anything we try and do, I think is really important. It just gives you extra sort of ammunition to achieve what you want to achieve. Third strategy to manage your thoughts, or to be in control of your mind, is to interrupt your negative thoughts. So to distract your thoughts. Our society tells us that when we talk to ourselves, talking to ourselves is the first sign of craziness, apparently. Yeah, I know, I completely disagree with that. I think we should all talk to ourselves a lot more. And if we do, we can achieve this stuff in our mind, not out loud and people will think you're crazy, but in your mind. If we have conversations with ourselves, and if we recognize things, and if we stop our chain of thought and challenge ourselves and tell ourselves, wait a sec, this isn't good, or I know how I feel when I have these thoughts, or I know this is sinful and not right, or what am I going to achieve by blah, blah, blah. If we actually have conversations with ourselves and we do a lot of this stuff, it can have really good outcomes. So interrupting your negative thoughts, understanding them, acknowledging them, knowing, being able to identify them, and when they do, interrupt them. Stop them in their tracks. Okay? Another strategy is to replace your negative thoughts. So if you can't interrupt them and you can't stop them and you guys get negative thoughts, it is what it is. Maybe you can try and replace them with positive thoughts. So you got your negative thought and your mind, you can't help but go there, but you can replace them and you can come up with a different alternative. You can counteract your negative thoughts or present a different option. So, something's bad or negative, okay, and you can present to yourself and to your mind, and you can, in a way, manipulate your mind with a different option. What if that's not the case? Okay, this and this has happened, but what about if I can then go on and do this? Or what if I learn from this and I do this differently next time? Or if it's something that I'm worried about, okay, that may happen, but what if it doesn't happen? Or what if it doesn't eventuate? Or what if the outcome is the exact opposite and it's really, really good? Whatever you can come up with. But to counteract your negative thoughts with a positive thought is a really good thing to do. One thing I always tell my clients, at the very least, if you're going to have negative thoughts or you're not in control of your thoughts and you can't stop them, then balance them with a positive. 1-to-1 ratio. Because throughout our day, if we have 5, 10, 15, 20 negative thoughts and we have one positive, that's not a good day. That's a horrible day. In a week, if we have 500 negative thoughts and 20 positives, that's a horrible week. So as much as you can, if you can't control your thoughts and you can't interrupt them and you can't stop them, and you worry about things or you're a bit anxious about things, or negativity comes into your mind, then at the very least, muster up whatever you can to balance it with a positive thought. 1-for-1. And it's all about perception as well. So, and I had an experience recently. It was a horrible one. So I got robbed, right? I'll tell you the story. It's fun. It's not funny. It's funny. So we're in the Central Coast, and we're on holidays, and we're in my wife's car, and there was luggage and everything when we got to the hotel. So I took out all the stuff, and I was flustered, and the kids were running around. It was just disastrous. And I forgot to come back and get everything else out of the car. And I never ever do. I've never ever done this before. But I left my wallet and my keys inside the car, and then took everything up and just forgot to go back and get them. Then the next morning, I went down, and the car had been robbed. Not robbed, but just opened, and everything was gone. And they took the wallet, they took the keys, they took, a lot of things that were in the car. And unfortunately for me, my keys and my wallet. So they had my license, which had my address, and they had my keys, and it was in the Central Coast, so they knew that we were away on holidays. So I came home, and they had robbed my house. So they drove from the Central Coast, and we came to my house while we were away, and they robbed my house. And they took everything, all right? And very weirdly, they took all my clothes. I don't wear nice clothes, as you can see. I'm not a fashionista by any trade, but they took all my clothes, they cleared my wardrobe, right? So I was spewing. And it is what it is, and a lot of other things. We didn't have insurance, and it was just a disaster. And then I was telling one of my friends, like everyone obviously knew, I was talking to one of my friends, and obviously all my thoughts were negative, and I was spewing, and I didn't have insurance, so I'm going to have to, get all new stuff, and just, it's scary. The robbers come into your house, they take all your stuff, they've been in your room, it's freaky. And then my friend, he's going, oh, no way. And then he goes, so you now have the opportunity to go shopping, to buy all new clothes. I go, yeah, I do, like Zara and H&M and like hectic, yeah, let's go shopping. And then he goes, you know what, man, if these guys are going to rob your clothes, like these guys are in need. Someone's going to take clothes, like TV, yeah, we can understand, expensive stuff, tools, whatever, like valuable stuff, fair enough. If someone's going to take your clothes, they're in need. Like they obviously need it, and they've taken it. And, it's unfortunate for you, but at least, these guys have clothes. And it was at that point, and that conversation with that friend, that completely flipped my whole psyche and all my emotions and everything in regards to this experience. And it wasn't that bad. 2 awesome things came out of it. I get to go shopping and buy a whole new wardrobe, which I never thought of before, and I got a good excuse to buy stuff. And 2, someone that may have been in need, not cool that they stole, but at least they're clothed, and if they're poor or if they're whatever, they've now got things that they didn't have before. And it was that perception or that person's way of looking at a very horrible situation that completely flipped and changed, and genuinely the impact that I had moving forward from that experience, it didn't have the same negativity and the same thought on me that it did before. Yeah, and it all came down to how I perceived it and how this person perceived it. So changing thoughts like that or counteracting thoughts like that can be very, very powerful to your whole experience, your whole perception of reality, and the impact that it has on your feelings and your emotions, which is the last strategy. Even if things are negative, even if bad things happen, even if bad thoughts happen, whatever it is that goes on that's negative, I'll challenge all of you to try and find a positive in whatever's happened, even really, really bad stuff. We hear stories, of horrible things that have happened and people, with God's help and God's grace, turning it into good or finding the positive. You guys might have heard this story in South Africa years ago. There was a black fella, he was poor, homeless, whatever, and he had murdered this guy. And he was an African guy, a white South African. And he was the only son of that lady. Have any of you guys heard this story? No? This was years ago. And he murdered the son, and this was her only son, and her husband had died, and now her son had died. And he obviously went into prison and whatever. And then years later, he was up for parole, or he was getting out. He had done his time, and they connected with this mum. They spoke to this mum. And the mum said went to the bail hearing or whatever it is, parole, and said to the courts, I will agree for you guys letting him out if he agrees to come and live with me and to replace my son. So he took my son. The least he can do is come and live in my home and let me care for him and he can care for me, just like the relationship I had with my son before we killed him. And the courts, were obviously blown away, but put it to him. And he was very touched and, he accepted. He came out and he lived with that woman. I don't know what's happening now, but with the rest of his life, or if he's still alive, I don't know. But he lived with that woman as her son when he came out of jail. So I don't think we can find a more horrible situation than someone killing our child. Like, that's got to be, the pinnacle. But you can find a positive if you dig really, really, really deep. You really can. This Oatlands family, Danny, Abdullah and Layla, again, horrific things. Like, I don't think any of us can think of something worse than to lose multiple children, or people that, pass away of cancer or accidents, or, all the stuff that goes on in life. You hear of horrific situations, and people somehow can find positives in negatives. And I believe there will always be a positive in any negative that happens. So again, for us, in our psyche and in our minds, even if bad things happen or bad thoughts happen, if we can find the positive, it will have less of a negative impact on us, on our emotions, on our feelings, on our behaviors. Sometimes we'll have to dig real deep or really think outside the box, but I can guarantee you a positive will be there if we look hard enough. So these are the strategies to try and control your thoughts, manage your thoughts. Any questions? Any Slido questions? Any comments? Any thing you didn't quite agree with or get, or something that's maybe a bit idealistic that I said? Yes. Yeah.
Does the one-to-one have to count out? Does the one-to-one have to counteract the thought you're having, or can it be any positive thought?
Look, ideally, if it can counteract the negative thought, then it will replace the negative thought. So if you have a negative thought and you can come up with, or you can rationalize, or you can manipulate your mind to convince yourself to get rid of that negative thought and replace it with a positive, then you're golden. Then you don't have an issue. And if you can do that with the thoughts as they come up, then you're in a really good position. If you can't, and if the negative thought is there, then at least you've got a positive thought there as well. Like, at least it's balanced. So you're not just swimming in a pool of negativity and depression and anxiety, and there's nothing positive that's featuring in your mind. So at least if you can't get rid of it, if you can't interrupt it, if you can't replace it, like we said in the first few strategies, then at least balance it with a positive. So at least you're living life and you're going day by day. Yes, there's negative and there's a bit of anxiety, maybe a bit of, depression or whatever it is that you're experiencing, or you're not in control and there's negativity coming in, but there's also positivity in the same place in your mind. And if you can do that, you're in a better position. Like we said, if the ratio is out, if it's 10-1, no one wants to live like that. If it's 20-1, no one wants to live like that. So if you can, as much as you can, try and get that ratio of 1-1 and you'll feel a lot better. Do you have questions? Awesome. So the first question is, can negative or conformed thoughts lead to problematic feelings, such as fear, anxiety? If so, how can we change this? So 100%. negative thoughts or conformed thoughts, they lead to, and they do, what we know of CBT, if you do have negative thoughts, like we said, they will lead to negative feelings. You will feel not good if your mind is thinking of things that are not good or that are problematic or that are depressing. So we know that for a fact, such as fear and anxiety, yes. And if so, how can we change this? And I think we sort of answered that in some of the strategies. If you guys can do some of this stuff. And, you know, we hear it a lot, and I don't want it sort of to be a scapegoat and something that we just defer to, but in all honesty, the praying is the most powerful one, or at least the praying and involving God allows you to more effectively do all these other things. These other things are great, but they're so much more powerful and successful if we can bring God into the picture. God will help us interrupt our negative thoughts if we involve him and ask him. He'll help us replace our negative thoughts and wipe negative thoughts completely if we ask him to help us and we involve him in the process. He'll help us counteract. He'll help us achieve that 1-to-1 ratio. He'll help us find positivity in negativity. I can guarantee you, and Danny and Layla talk about it all the time, their ability to forgive that fella for running over their 3 kids, and their ability to go off and do everything it is that they're doing is not without God. That's not them. And they've said it very plainly. And I can guarantee you that South African woman is not her. As human beings and as broken beings, we do not have the capacity or the ability to do some of this stuff. If someone kills my kid, I don't have it in me to love and to forgive and to welcome that person into my home. I don't. As a human, I don't. But as a human with God dwelling inside me, 100% I can. And this stuff, it's not easy. If someone's suffering from anxiety or depression, it's hard to interrupt your thoughts. It sounds good on a PowerPoint. It's hard to do. It's hard to replace your thoughts. It's hard to counteract. It's even hard to get that 1-to-1 ratio. If you're so down on your thoughts, it's hard to think of positive. You can't see any positivity. You can't find it if you're in that state. But bringing God into it makes this stuff a lot more possible. So I hope that answers that question. I have another one. A holistic approach seems to be the best way to find my way. However, I feel like I can never switch off my mind in this confusing world. Is this normal? And if anyone has any answers or thoughts to these questions, please let me know. Abuna, if you want to jump into any of this, please. My take, look, I think it is normal. I really do. And statistically, we'll tell 1 in 5 is huge. 1 in 5 is a very high number. So I think it is normal, and I think it's going to be more normal for us to be struggling with this stuff as life goes on. We've got much more influences now. We've got much more, like opposition. We've got so much more negativity coming to us now, I think, than we ever had before. So the fact that we're coming across this stuff, maybe not normal, but more prevalent and more common. I would definitely say is more prevalent and more common. So feeling like you can never switch your mind off and experiencing these thoughts, yes, I think a lot of us will have them, but I think there are things that we can do to sort of deal with them. We don't have to accept them and concede and say, oh, life is getting harder, social media, the influences, the devil's more active than he ever has been, and all this stuff. Khalas, it's done, and concede and accept defeat. Absolutely not. I think there is things that we can do, as hard as it is, to counteract some of this stuff. And guys, I'm a therapist, and we do a lot of it at Exodus. If you're really struggling with your thoughts, and even a lot of this stuff you try and do, and it's still very hard, there is help. I know there's a massive stigma with counselling and psychology, and even culturally for us, I think it's not something that as a culture for us we're very involved in. But there is help. There is counselling and there is psychology and there is people that can assist you and can tailor support to you and specific strategies to you that may work with you, case by case scenario, that maybe you haven't had before, you tried before. So if any of you guys, if it is to a point where you really are struggling, or you can't get in control of your mind or your thoughts, and it's really having an impact on you, then there is help out there. And how I would measure that is, individually for all of us, know your baseline. So you know yourself, you know how you were raised, you know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you know what you're good at, what you're not, you know how you've always been, you know what your family's like and how you're raised. Every single one of us knows your baseline and what's the norm for you. And assess and analyze yourself. If you're finding yourself heaps far from your baseline, then maybe you need to think about what you're going to do to bring yourself back a little bit. If you're finding yourself, and especially at a point in time, if lately or the last year or two or something significant has happened in your life, like if you know yourself and you know what you're feeling or the lack of control that you have or the emotions that you're having or the behaviors that you're doing is far from your baseline, then that's an indicator that you need to pay attention to this stuff. Does anybody want to add anything to these questions? Abuna?
With a good fellowship, like if we 100% is very confusing outside, but if I'm trying to be surrounded by people, we have the same goal, same thoughts, same interest, we have our Bible or the Word of God as something common, that will make a big difference in our mind, and that will make our thoughts more positive than to be a negative thing. That's, I think, from what you're saying in the thoughts, it's really important that to feed my thoughts with positive thoughts will not come by itself. It will come from people around us. If we're always being surrounded by negative people, we'll always be negative. We'll never see the positives. But if we try to see the positives and find people around us to encourage us and be positive, I think will make a difference. I think that's lead us to how important friends and fellowship and being in the church and being surrounded by others, we have the same interests, will make a huge difference in our journey.
100%, and that's 100% correct. And we know as well as humans, we're social beings. Like God created Adam and he gave him Eve because he said it's not good for men to be alone and gave him partner. So we are social beings. We relate, we're influenced, we interact. We need community. A lot of us, most of us, need community to survive. And if that community, I totally agree, if it's negative or it's not, guiding and assisting us in the correct way, then that's going to be a big problem for us. And if it is positive and great and we're like-minded people, we've got the same goals, we're encouraging each other, even if one of us is lacking and the support network is there to hold us accountable, to ask us, what's happening or what's going on or provide support, then we've got a much better chance. And again, if we're left to our own devices, it's probably not going to end well, because for me, individually, as a human, I don't have much going for me as a human being. But if we are connected to Christian friends, Christian fellowship, like-minded people, like-spirited people, and even like if we can't see but someone else can, we have friends that are good friends, they may be able to see something that we can't. They may pray for us and God, pushes them to help us in a way that we couldn't get elsewhere. So I totally agree. We're relational beings and we should be connected. That will help us on our journey, 100%. 100%.
About the source of our thoughts. And where is it coming from? Coming from me, from inside me, from experience I went through, from social media, where it comes from. Because we know that Satan can throw some thoughts, but how much I have that kind of interaction with the thoughts, and do you have that kind of responsibility about all my thoughts come to my mind? I think that's, if we can highlight that.
Look, that's a very good question. There's not a one-size-fits-all answer. So thoughts can come and feelings and all this stuff can come from anywhere and everywhere. It can come from past trauma. It can come from influences from people around us. It can come from things we see and things we hear. Spiritually, a big part of it can come from the devil. There's so many different areas and streams where thoughts and feelings and emotions can enter into us. And part of therapy, the first thing we do as therapists is figure out with that individual person and understand that better. If we can understand two things: what the thoughts are or what the triggers are and where they're coming from, then we can fix it. If we can't, we've got no idea. We're going blind. So if we don't know what the negative thoughts are, what the worries are, what the depressive feelings are, if we don't know the triggers, then we can't deal with them or manage them or get rid of them or fix them because we don't know what they are. And if we don't know where they're coming from, then we've got a problem. We don't know how to, to stop it. We don't know how to guard ourselves. Or we don't know, maybe we don't go to this place, or we don't talk to this person, or we don't stay, unengaged for a long period of time, or whatever it is. So it's very important, I think, individually to figure out, or with the help of someone, if we are having thoughts, negative thoughts or feelings or emotions, to figure out those two things, to understand them and name them, what it is exactly that they are and where they're coming from. And that's our best chance to deal with them. But I think to answer your question, anywhere and everywhere, they can come from anything. And a lot of people, trauma is a big one. If people have experienced things, those experiences, and they're in the part of the mind and the brain that don't usually go away. If it's not dealt with, it may be a bit quieter in the background, may not peep its head up maybe till a bit later or in different ways, but it'll always be there. And unless you deal with it, it'll always be there. And it can show up at any time and impact you in any way. So past experiences as trauma is definitely a big one. The devil, we know, any opportunity. And this is like, people talk about this concept of mindfulness. Have you heard about mindfulness? Do you know what mindfulness is? I don't like mindfulness at all, because it's clearing your mind. From a spiritual perspective, it's clearing your mind, it's meditating, and it's relaxing, and it's ridding your mind and your psyche of things, but it's not filling it with anything. And I think spiritually it's a real concern, because if we're emptying ourselves of that and we're not filling it with something positive, then it opens the path for the devil to come in and cause absolute havoc. So I don't think it's just enough to clear and to get rid of. We need positivity. We need to replace things with positive things, not just get rid of negative, because then you're just stale. We need to fill our minds and our beings with Christ, essentially, with Christ, with his will, just like that verse said, to renew our minds and to fix it and to clean it, not just to empty it, but to clean it and to bring him in so we know his will for us and we conduct our lives according to that. So there's one more question. I always assume the worst out of people because of past experiences. How can I stop this? So always assume the worst of people because of past experiences. How can I stop this? That's a good question. That's trauma. So past experiences, you've been burnt, and you've been burnt multiple times. So naturally, and as your human body would expectedly, you'll think the worst of people, or you'll guard yourself, or you'll be very apprehensive to not let yourself be in that position or happen again. So on one hand, it's totally understandable. Look, how do you fix this? I think looking at things, a bit more objectively. I think you learn from previous experiences. So if you've been burnt or, from past experiences, people have treated you badly, I think you learn from past experience. You don't just use them to stop doing things or to not trust people or to not move on, but you learn from them. You still move forward, but you learn from them. So if you've been burnt, you've been treated badly, and that makes you find the worst in everyone, analyze that. What happened? Did you let someone in that you shouldn't have? Did you follow someone blindly? Were you too nice and being taken advantage of and you didn't exercise wisdom? Those experiences, is there an element where you may be a little bit at fault as well, or you could have done things differently? So I think understanding your past experiences, analyzing them, getting your head around them, and learning from them to not make the same mistake or to not find yourself in the same situation moving forward with people. I don't think the answer is to just automatically assume the worst in people. And for two reasons. One, that's probably not the case, because the next person you come across, the next friend you make, the next partner you're with may likely not like the person before. So that's not fair to them, and it's not fair to you, because you're going to be depriving yourself of relationships or depriving yourself of opportunities, or you're causing yourself to sin if you're going to judge someone before they have done anything just because you've been burnt from people before. It's probably not the best way to move forward. So I think past experiences are important and they form your mind, yes, rather than just using them to conduct yourself in a certain way moving forward and think the worst or not engage or withdraw, anything like that. Learn from them, use them, analyze them, and do things differently to keep yourself safe moving forward would probably be my advice. But I'm more than happy for anyone else who has a suggestion to this person. Abuna.
Just one thing I want to confirm with you from what you said. No, no, I'm fine. Fine. About forgiveness. The idea of forgiveness and always carrying out the feelings and hurt and maybe kind of hates. It will never be changed unless I'm not gonna change my mind, but I decide that I want to forgive. Once I start that thought with the prayer and the grace of God, I will be able to forgive. It can't happen otherwise, because if I'm gonna wait until my feeling calms down, it might not calm down. I think to forgive someone is just to decide to forgive and to put reason that why should I forgive? Why should I forgive? And then with prayer, I think, as you said, it will make a huge difference out.
And again, I'll go back to Danny and Layla. Clearly, I follow these people a lot in their story, and I'm very inspired by it. And I don't know if this is correct religiously, so maybe you can correct me. But their like tagline with their whole I Forgive Day and everything they've done and their journey with this whole situation, their tagline is, forgiveness is more for the forgiver, not the forgiven. So for them and their journey, their decision to forgive wasn't for the guy that was drug affected and killed their kid. It's not for him. They're saying it's for them to be able to move on with their life, for them to be able to still be functioning and not be brought down by this, to care for their other kids, for them to have peace, for them to still be able to show love, and for them to be able to function. Essentially, they felt they need to forgive this person so they can go on with their lives. And I think that the same thing, in that question, if you decide to forgive, you're doing it for, primarily for yourself. So you're able to move on. So you're able to continue to show Christ to other people. So you're able to, not be burnt and scarred and not think the worst of people and not judge people and make friendships and serve and do everything that God wants you to do. So making the decision to forgive, even if you've been wronged, and sort of going through that process is more for you than anyone else. I agree. Yes.
It's not a question, but it's a comment. Just firstly, that slide I think is probably one of the best things that I've seen. That's all around like cognitive behavioral therapy strategies and stuff like that. And I think it's important to note that this stuff is not just for people who do suffer from anxiety or any other psychological problems. It's actually for anyone. Anyone, we all have positive and negative thoughts, and we all have struggles psychologically, whether we put a tag on it or not. And so all these strategies are really great. But I know that arrow praise is one of the spiritual side, but one thing that you can actually sort of see in there is that positive thoughts as well, like changing our negative thoughts to positive thoughts, a lot of that stuff also comes from our prayers. For example, positive thoughts is if you read the Psalms, they are all positive. They're all so positive and they're all so uplifting and it's filling your mind with those positive thoughts. So then you get not only the positive thoughts, the 1-to-1 ratio, you're increasing that ratio dramatically, you're getting a lot more positive, but also you're getting the grace of God, which Abuna was talking about before, that you can't forgive this person without, as a human, no, certainly I can't forgive somebody that killed my kids as a drunk driver, but through the grace of God and doing all this stuff, I think it's great. So I love that slide.
And I guess on that point, if we're in the presence of God, so reading the Bible, living a Christian life, living according to God's will, all this stuff, like we said in the first few slides, you're being in the presence of God. And if you're in the presence of God, negativity cannot survive. And a lot of the time, negativity can't even penetrate. So if, we talk about light and darkness, darkness cannot, it's impossible for darkness to exist in the presence of light. It's impossible. If you, even a faint light, if you have a lighter or a candle or a torch or anything, then it's no longer darkness because there's a light there. So darkness cannot survive when there is light, cannot exist when there's light. And it's the same for us. If we are constantly, in the presence of God, it can't. Negativity cannot survive. It cannot be around for long. And even if it is, and you can, people can pray and people can be spiritual and people can be connected to God definitely and still have feelings, negative thoughts, negative feelings, anxiety and depression. They could still have some sort of, mental illness, or not even mental illness, but have negativity as human beings while being connected to God. But we know that if we are in the presence of God, even if that's there, we'll be able to deal with it. He'll give us what we need. He'll give us the strength, the courage, the strategy, the determination, the motivation, the longevity, the endurance, whatever it is that we need to deal with what we're going through. So he doesn't promise us if we're with him, life will be fine and dandy. He's never promised that. But he has promised us that if we're with him, we'll get through whatever. Yeah.
Asked him a question about like psychology and how to deal with it and stuff like that. And he said something really interesting. He said that this is like the first comment that he said, I think, was this is a very Western issue. Okay, and it's interesting that you see because like when you think about your parents and like the way that they grew up and everything like that, it's always those little one-liners that or like all those little things that like those positive things that throughout the day, and they've learned the Psalms when they were younger and all this stuff that I think we lack, and so we tend to see the negative effects of the negative thoughts a lot more because we don't have that stuff. So yeah, it was very interesting.
And they're all arrow prayers if you think about it. All those little comments that all our annoying parents make when we tell them, just stop, not everything's about God, inshallah, and all this stuff they say. If you really think about it, they're just injecting God into everything. Everything they do and say, they're just injecting God into everything. And I agree with the Pope. I reckon it'll make a big difference. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Oh, awesome. Thank you very much.
Just want to say a huge thank you to Kira for coming and joining us for the first time. I really pray we get to have you again one day. Thank you so much. Just 3 announcements from me today. First, we've got book club tomorrow, every Monday, face-to-face at church. It's at 7:30, and they're currently reading the book If You Love Me by Father Matthew the Poor. And this week, they're going to do chapters 3, 4, and 5. So if you guys are keen to join, I know they do a mad feed every week, so you will be fed well. Just make sure you have the book, or is there a PDF? If you want, Benny can send you guys a PDF. If you don't have the physical book and you'd like to catch up. Also,
Just on the point, very excited, man. After have you all, you guys will come down on Monday. Very, very exciting. Chapter 4 is only 1 page, it's really short. It sounds like a lot for chapters. So it's around 10 pages, so it's nice and easy. Small book. Love that whole book. Thank you.
Also for Bible study on Wednesdays, we're finishing off the book of Genesis, and it's at 7:30. I'm not entirely sure who the speaker is this week, but come and find out. I'm sure it'll be amazing. Also, one last very exciting news, or announcement, sorry. We have officially booked camp. Please block out the dates, the 18th to the 20th of November. It is going to be at Coleroy. We haven't been there in a very long time. And it's going to be amazing, God willing. And we'd love to see everyone there. We will give you more details soon, such as prices and whatnot. And hopefully registrations for that will open soon so we can get started very quickly. But just for now, please save it on your calendars, block out that weekend. It's going to be the 18th to the 20th of November, and I hope we can see you all there. Just stay seated for a picture, and then we'll stand up to pray. Johnny. Guys, move. Yalla, yalla, yalla. Johnny. John Riyad, hurry up. All right, count of three. 1, 2, 3. All right, could you please stand for prayer?
Alleluia, Alleluia, Jesus Christ, the King of glory, is risen from the dead. This is he to whom is due glory. Here with his good Father and the Holy Spirit, both now and forever. Jefes marot en jeviot nemebshi rinem biebnevma ethoab tetere yasejikevol tenochtemos tenti
Father, Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity that you've given us to come together. We thank you for giving us your word in the Bible, have all the answers and all the strategies and all the directions that we could possibly need to live our lives according to your will. We thank you for giving us this fellowship, giving us the church to facilitate discussions and talks and to help us on our journey to get to know you and to live with you. Please help us and guard us, guard our thoughts, our minds, our body, our spirit, our whole being every day, to be protected and to live our lives according to your will. Help every single one of us here, Lord, on our journey. Help any of us that have any negative thoughts or struggle with any sort of ailments, and heal us and give us the strength and the strategy to cling to you when things get tough, and to have faith in your promises, that you'll help us with whatever it is that we need. Amen.
The intercession of Saint Mary, Archangel Michael, Saint Mark, Saint Barbara, Saint Julian, and Saint Ophir, and all your heavenly saints and angels. Hear us, Lord, when we pray thankfully, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, thy kingdom come. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us trespasses, as we forgive those trespass against us. For Jesus Christ, our Lord, the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever.
Are you sitting in there laughing? No one's free tomorrow. Yeah. You need to change the door frame. We'll come and just do it. Huh? We'll come and just do it. Up to you. Make it smaller? Yeah, the door frame didn't make it smaller. You need to get bigger afterwards. Huh? No, it should be alright.